Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk to Gareth Furber, mental health project officer at Flinders University. I'm very happy to talk to him today and to have him as a guest in my professional podcast episode. Hello, welcome to the episode. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Andra. How are you?
I'm also good. I'm very glad that we can talk today and that I can find more about your activity.
Thank you for the invite. It's very nice to be here.
Okay, first of all, let's start with your story. How did you start and how did you get into your current activity, current job? That's very interesting for me.
Okay, cool. Pretty standard upbringing as a kid. I was good at school. So it was probably in high school always expected I'd go into university. I didn't know what I wanted to study when I went to university though. And I narrowed the choice down to psychology or computer science. And I claim, and I think this is true, that I flipped a coin and it came up psychology, so I decided to go with that. In Australia, you have to do a minimum of 6 years of training to become a registered psychologist.
Oh, okay.
So I did the 4 years, which is undergrad and honours year, and then I did something called a clinical PhD. So I got my training to be a psychologist, but I also wrote a PhD at the same time. It was a new course that was introduced at Flinders at the time. When I came out of that, I went into child and adolescent mental health, which, to be honest, I didn't know a lot about. I went into it because I had done a clinical placement there and had really got along well with the team, really enjoyed working in the area. The first 10 years of my working life was in child and adolescent mental health, even though that wasn't what I did my PhD on and wasn't really necessarily an area of specific interest. And then in 2017, that came to a close. We'd been working on a big project. The funding for that had finished, and I decided to try something different. I decided to get out of child and adolescent mental health and go somewhere different. So an opportunity came up at Flinders, where I'm working now, and it was to be, the job is, I'm attached to the health counselling and disability services team. So we're one of the services within the university that provide health and mental health care to students. And my job was to build some additional online services for students. So we started a student health and wellbeing blog. We started developing some programs that we could deliver online. We developed a topic within the student learning system where they do their course material, but we've got now a health and wellbeing topic in there. And I started doing lectures and teaching and things like that. So that's where I've been since 2017. And now really, my interest is wellbeing and productivity, those kind of two topics. And I try and learn as much as I can about those areas and then teach that to students so that they can start putting things in place to improve their own wellbeing and improve their academic outcomes as well.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. I wanted to ask you, what was your PhD on? Which topic?
Yeah, so in my honours, I looked at psychological outcomes for people who had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD. And then in my PhD, I sort of extended that basic idea, but looking at people who had coronary artery disease, who'd recently had a heart attack or a diagnosis of coronary artery disease. And we looked at sort of the 6 months after their cardiac event and how they recovered psychologically. And then I guess, developed an intervention, a workbook intervention that we gave to some of the people to see whether that would hasten their recovery or amplify that psychological recovery. So it turned out that it didn't, but that's okay. That's part of the scientific process. So yeah, at that stage, by the time I finished my PhD, I thought I would be working in health psychology area. I thought I would be working in chronic disease and chronic illness and the psychological impacts of that. But when I finished my PhD, I was broke and I had to take the first job that came along. And that was in child and adolescent mental health. And I stayed there, for 10 years. So when I came back to Flinders, even though I haven't come back into health psychology per se, I have gone back to that, exploring whether or not the written word, whether or not teaching people about their mental health can help them enhance their mental health. In my PhD, I did that with cardiac patients. Now I do that with students. Like, is it possible to teach people things about their mental health and things about productivity that they can then put into action and actually improve those areas? And that sort of remains my main interest now, or my main question.
It's interesting because you said at the beginning that you were struggling between psychology and informatics, and now you're kind of combining it, and it turns right a circle, I think.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there. I've ended up in a space where I can do a little bit of the computer science, a little bit of the online, and I really enjoy doing that. Whilst the COVID situation has been a horrible situation for the world as a whole, in terms of, for someone like me who works in the online space, it's been an opportunity for me to learn some new platforms, get better at doing online teaching, get better at doing these kinds of conversations online, and so yeah, I really enjoy that intersection of psychology and the technology side as well.
That's great. Okay, then I'd like to ask you, what is your passion behind your current job? What makes you very fascinated, and what gives you the power to do that job?
Yeah, I think it's the case that when I switched jobs in 2017 and I started working at the university, I probably wasn't particularly healthy or happy myself at that stage. Mm-hmm. So I came to the university. I knew that I needed to help students improve their well-being or improve their productivity, but I kind of had to do the same for myself as well. Okay. So I think the reason I'm passionate about those topics is I'm just as interested in them for my own life as I am for the lives of the students. So there's a bit of selfishness there, I guess, as well, which is as I get to read and learn more about how a person builds well-being and productivity, how they make themselves healthier and happier over time, I'm applying that in my own life and then using that as a bit of a test ground to provide feedback to students about what they might encounter when they try and do it themselves. So I've tried to develop a lot of good habits over the last a few years. I've worked hard to try and improve different areas of my life using what I've learned from my discipline, psychology, and what I've learned along the way. So yeah, I think the passion and interest is maintained because what I'm teaching and talking about, I'm also applying in my own life. And it's cool to be able to do a job where it's both helpful to other people, but also both helpful to you as well. Which is probably one of the good things about working in psychology as a whole, is that you do learn a lot that can help you in your own life. So I think that's probably what does it. I think the other thing probably that is university students are a good group to work with. They're interested, they're keen, they want to learn, they want to get better at what they're doing in their studies, but often they just want to get better as people. So they're a motivated group. So when you talk to them and you teach to them, you get a good response from them. You get appreciation from them. So I think that plays a part as well. It's just a good population in which to work.
Yeah, that's motivating, I guess.
Correct.
Okay, then I want to ask you the lessons you learned so far from your current job.
The biggest one, I think, is so for example, when I came into this job, I thought I'd be doing the bulk of my job online. I'd be writing blogs, I'd be developing courses, I'd be putting everything in the digital realm. But then it turned out that people wanted me to come out and do some teaching, face-to-face teaching and stuff like that. And then other opportunities came up. They wanted me to, write a book or a guide for a particular group. And I would just say pretty much yes to whatever people asked for, even if I didn't think I was any good at what it was that they were asking for, or that it would necessarily be hugely useful. I just tried to put myself in lots of kind of new situations. So I'd done some teaching before, but not a lot, so that was new. And at the moment we're developing some video content, so I'm learning from another colleague who's good at building instructional videos. So I've put my hand up to record a few of them and get better at them over the time. So the biggest lesson I've learned from my job, and that's translated into, I think, my mental fitness stuff, is that it's really useful for me to consistently put myself in new and slightly uncomfortable situations so that I can learn and get better at what I do. So almost the more uncomfortable you are with the situation, in this context, probably the more you'll get from it, the more growth you'll get from it. So I really didn't want to go on camera and do these recorded, these live video things, but I knew it would be good for me to pick up that set of skills. So that's probably the main lesson for me, is because I tend to be a creature of habit. So I tend to kind of do each day exactly the same, sort of same routine, the same lunch, same kind of things like that. So a good thing for me seems to be put myself in increasingly new and different situations. That would be the main one I've got. And then each time I've done that, and it hasn't always gone well, I've done some really awful teaching sessions, and I've done some, pretty ordinary video content and some pretty ordinary stuff. But you learn so much in the process, and you get better rapidly. So the lecture that I did a really terrible lecture one day, and it was awful. Everyone in the room agreed it was awful. I knew it was awful. But the next two lectures I did after that were way better, because I'd worked out what it is I'd done wrong, what it is that had gone wrong, and I was able to fix those. So yeah, that's the big lesson for me, is keep pushing myself to try new things, even if they're kind of uncomfortable and I'm not sure I want to do them.
Yes, just keep your comfort zone. It's the biggest learning out there. Yeah.
That's right. And it makes for a more exciting day. It makes for a more exciting job if you're a bit nervous about doing something. Once you've finished, you get a real sense of achievement out of it. So even this interview, like, I was a bit like, oh, do I do the interview? Like, not sure I've done one of those before, and well, I thought, well, why not? Why wouldn't you give that a go? You get to meet someone new, you get to talk about some new stuff. So I try to. It doesn't have to be heaps often, but once a week, once every couple of weeks, just look out for an opportunity, something that you can try that you haven't done before, and give it a go.
Yes, it's the same for me. I'm at the beginning of this podcast series, and it's challenging every time to and to adapt to every single guest, and it's very nice. I learn a lot every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are really generous, usually in the process. Like that lecture I did that was really terrible. The person who I did the lecture for, the teacher that called me in, they were very nice about it, and they called me in next year and said, would you like to have another crack at that lecture and see how it goes? And I did, and it went much better the second time. So I find that if you try these things, very rarely does it go so badly that you'll never go back there again. Even if it doesn't quite go to plan, you still get something amazing out of it. So
Yes.
yeah, which you're sort of discovering with the interview series, which I think is really cool that you're doing.
Thank you. It's very, very interesting for me to get to know people, to learn from them, and yes, it's quite a new experience to me, but I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a really good way for you to learn, because you're asking people to talk about themselves, and people love talking about themselves. So that's a great starting point. And then, you pick up a whole lot of new skills whilst you're doing that. You pick them up really rapidly. So.
Okay, then I want to ask you about your goals. What do you want to do in future?
That's a good question. I've probably only thought ahead a couple of years at a time. I didn't even used to do that. I used to only just think ahead about 24 hours. But I know that in the current job I'm at, I'd like to get to the point where I'll just backtrack and sort of explain something. When a student comes into our service, they might go and see a GP, or they might go and see a counsellor, or they might go and see a disability advisor. So there's these kind of different streams that they could go into depending on what their needs are. If all goes well with this job, my hope is that I've created a number of additional streams of things that they can go to. So they could do a wellbeing program online, or they could do like a program for high performance students who are in complex degrees, difficult degrees, and need to heighten their performance. Students who need to kind of get on top of basic study skills and things like that. So my hope is that by the time I finished there in a few years, that I've added these additional streams to what it is that our service can provide, and that they're online and students can do them in their own time and whenever they want. They just log in, start doing their course, and by the time they've finished it, they've got a new skill set. After that, I guess my main goal is to sort of take some of the same ideas, the same sort of mental fitness ideas, and see if they work in another population. Like, see if I could go into organizations and do staff training, and whether or not that improves productivity in the workplace. Or could I go into schools, for example? So could I drop down in age in maybe years 10 and 11, 12, do this kind of stuff to help students at the point at which their studies are starting to ramp up and get harder. So I think the basic ideas around mental fitness and building well-being and productivity, I kind of see myself in that space for hopefully a long time, but hopefully trying it in different settings and getting to know different populations. And then possibly, because I got out of clinical work, I stopped doing clinical work for just a couple of years after I graduated. But I think maybe as I get older and I feel as though I'll get a bit more life experience, and I feel comfortable with my underlying, I guess, model about life and how to enjoy it, that I might go back into doing individual clinical work at some point in time. So go back to that one-on-one setting. That's kind of the map I have in my head at this stage. I hold those internal maps fairly lightly, but just because life can change fairly quickly. But I hope I'm talking about this kind of stuff, wellbeing and productivity, at least for quite a few years yet. And maybe one thing I would add is that I did spend sort of about 10 years doing research and I haven't really done any research over the last few years, so it would be good, because we've developed a couple of programs now that we like. We've got a procrastination program, we've got a mental fitness program, we've got some other ones. I would like to perhaps go back to evaluating those, put my academic hat back on, and run some, even if they're small trials of those programs, to see if they actually have the effects that we think they're having. So that would maybe be another aspect of it, so that I can publish on those programs.
Oh, that's great. That's really interesting. I like your ideas. It's very, very
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's that our training, really, the training that we did, the program that we did, was intended to always kind of make us professionals that could work clinically, that could do research, that could teach. So if I get a chance to do all of those in the context of the topic of wellbeing and productivity, I think I'll be pretty happy.
Okay. It's great because you're applying science to practice, and I like this combination very much.
Yeah, well, the way I see it is, the field that I'm in, psychology, has a lot of good content in it that's worth teaching people about. And there's probably more content in psychology to teach than I could possibly ever get around to teaching, even if I had another 40, 50 years of doing this. But that seems to me to make a lot of sense, which is, if we've spent 100 or so years accumulating a lot of knowledge in this discipline of psychology, and as best I can, I'm going to try and translate that and teach that to people who haven't, or won't get the chance to study psychology as I have, to be in it. It's something that they can use practically in their lives. And then even beyond psychology, there's lots of other disciplines that you can draw awesome content from as well. So admittedly, my interest in other disciplines of philosophy and medicine and dietetics and a whole other range of areas has sort of increased over time as well, because I realise there's cool stuff in there that people can use to improve their mental health as well.
Okay, then I want to switch to the next question. And I want to ask you, what do you think is your unique ability that has helped you to become the person you are today in your job, in your daily life?
That was a good. I sat there pondering that question for a while when you sent that one through. It took me a while to sort of work it out, work out what I think it is. I would say that I'm not remarkable at any one thing. There's not one thing that I'm just amazing at. Like, I'm not an amazing musician, or I'm not an amazing clinician, or I'm not an amazing, but I can do lots of things quite well. And it turns out that that's not a bad place to be. If you can do a lot of things, lots of different things quite well, then you can get enjoyment out of lots of different things. So the fact that I'm a psychologist who has an understanding of well-being, but is also really comfortable in the online space and with technology, sort of puts me part of a smaller group. And then the fact that I'm not too bad at applying these principles in my own life and building good habits, and that makes me a bit better at my job. And then the fact that I have interests outside of just my work, playing guitar or art or things like that none of them I'm great at, but all of them I'm okay at, means that I get a chance to have a pretty rich range of things that I get to work on, and can draw from a range of different experiences. So I think that's it. I think it's I'm not a master of anything, but I'm pretty good at a lot of things. And that I used to hate that. I used to want to be brilliant at one thing. Do you know what I mean? But I've realised over time that actually it was always a much nicer gift to be decent at a lot of things. I think that works well in my role, and works well in my life as a whole, I think. I think that's the answer to the question. I don't know. I gave it a bit of thought, like I said.
Yes, it's great because you can combine them, I guess. if you're good at many fields, you can create new great stuff by putting different pieces together.
Very good point. You can synthesize some things together that someone who didn't have those two areas in their life couldn't necessarily do. I think also in my job, I think the fact that I can do a good job of a lot of different things means that, for example, my boss can turn to me and say, we need you to write a paper that's a bit more academic in nature, and I can do that. Or, okay, we need you to write a blog post and I can write something more. Or we need to send you off so you can do a bit of teaching. Or we need you to run this committee, or we need you to do this. So they've got faith that most jobs that they give me, I'm going to do an okay job at it. Even if I don't necessarily have a huge amount of experience in that area, I'm still going to be able to do it fairly well. So that's probably helped in terms of just being a useful member of a team that people can turn to for lots of different things. So I think that's the case. But it sounds arrogant to say it out loud, but I think that's what it might be about.
Okay. If you are looking at your current job, I have a question. I want to know, for someone who wants to be mentally fit but also performant, and to combine those fields together, which recommendations do you have? Practical recommendations.
So this was the other question I spent a bit of time thinking about. So I've thought a lot about mental fitness, and I can go into that topic in more depth, but if I really try and narrow it back to kind of a couple of core set of recommendations. The first is that both well-being and productivity seem to be built through good habit formation. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if someone wants to get to reduce their anxiety or their stress levels, for example, they might take up meditation. Mm-hmm. And they're going to get benefits from meditation if they do it regularly, 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day. And that needs to become a habit, something that they embed in their life. If they want to get physically fit, they have to embed exercise into their life on an ongoing basis. So, if they want to improve their memory or their mood, they're going to have good sleep habits and so forth. So most areas of personal development can usually be tied back to some kind of habit or set of habits that you need to develop over time. So my first suggestion for people is just to try and learn a lot about how we form habits, how you go about establishing good habits. And I talk with students about, you've got the habits that help you with your well-being, but you've also got study habits, right? We want the way a student goes about their study influences how well they will do at it. So students who use good study strategies that we know improve learning and use them on a regular basis do better than students who sort of go at it in an ad hoc, unstructured sort of way. So habit seems to sit beneath both well-being and productivity. So if you get good at habit formation, you get good at creating routines in your everyday life, then you've got, I think, sort of the building blocks of both of those. The other one, which is sort of was the answer to the question of what have I learned from this job, which was the consistently putting yourself in some new situations so that you can meet new people, take on new perspectives, try on different viewpoints, just get exposed to things that you're not normally exposed to. And that can be as simple as just regular reading, for example. You're just picking one book every month that's out of your normal interest area, and just read that and learn about someone or something that you've never learned about before. Or it can mean things like this, taking opportunities like this to talk to someone you haven't talked to before and find out more about them. It would probably come back to those two if I was going to kind of narrow it down. And there's some other things that I think are important about it, but habit formation seems to me pretty central. And I probably spent the last 6 months with with all this stuff happening with COVID, with our students who are studying predominantly online. I've been talking very much to them about, when I've been giving lectures, talking to them about creating new habits and routines, because their life has been sort of turned upside down as a result of COVID. And one of the things they need to do is some of the habits that they'd already formed, like going to the gym or hanging out with friends, those things have to be put to the side. But now they have to build new ones. And if they can build new habits and build new routines, they'll adapt to the kind of the confines or the limitations of the situation at the time. And in terms of habit formation, it's just sort of a shout out in general, but there's a Stanford researcher, a guy called B.J. Fogg, who writes about tiny habits, who I think has really nailed a lot of the ideas. So I spend a lot of time teaching his particular habit model. I decided not to develop my own habit-based model because there's already people in the space who've done it really well. So yeah, that's my number one, is learn how to develop habits. And I've spent a lot of time kind of practicing that in my own life. So trying to get meditation as a regular part of life, trying to get yoga as a regular part of life, trying to change how I eat, trying to change how I sleep, trying to change. So I kind of see my life as a little bit of a laboratory in which I can try developing these sorts of new habits over time. And it's not easy, but the more you know about it, the easier it is to get things, new habits established.
Yeah, that's really important. Habits are so important in our life. I've learned about it after I finished my studies also in psychology, and I've went right into self-employment, and I've learned about habits, and it's so difficult to put them into practice, because when you are talking about them, it's easy. I mean, okay, I will start doing sports or reading, but if to do them really, that's really challenging, and I know that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the reasons why Fogg's model is a good one to start with is that he teaches you how to get success early, so that your confidence in your ability to build habits builds very quickly, within 1 or 2 weeks, as opposed to a lot of scenarios where we intend to start something like an exercise program or a new way of eating, and then it all falls apart after a couple of weeks, and then we feel dejected or a bit guilty or ashamed of ourselves, and then that reduces the likelihood that we'll go and try it again. So yeah, his model really focuses, his tiny habits model really focuses on getting lots of little small wins early on, and then that confidence feeds itself. Once you've got a bit of confidence that you can make meaningful changes, you'll start making more and more of them over time. So but he's not the only one. There's a guy, James Clear, that writes about habits. There's some stuff out of health psychology that you can draw on, but anything you can learn around habit formation, and it doesn't have to be in a psychological area. So you don't have to even necessarily be forming habits that we might call mental health habits. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be about meditation, for example, or therapy or journaling or something like that. It can any kind of habit that you can build on a regular basis that makes an improvement in your life. It might be financial habits. It might be the habit of saving money each week. It might be the habit of doing a budget. It might be there's a whole lot of things that you could do and make improvements in that will ultimately feed into your well-being, because you feel as though you've got a greater control over your life. You feel as though I've got a greater ability to shape my life how I want it to look than I originally thought I had, which is a really useful counter at the moment where a lot of things feel very out of control.
That's very, very important to take control of our life, and I guess then we will feel self-assured to make the next step, and we won't feel that blocked by all the strange situations right now.
Correct, because there is a lot of stuff that's out of our control. There is a lot of things that we don't have control over. But sometimes that hides or stops us seeing the parts of our lives that we can take control over. And small changes can have pretty massive impacts. I learned a few very basic, financial habits, budgeting and saving, which, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say sort of transformed kind of my financial situation, from, not having really any real confidence in relation to money to feeling a lot more confident and a lot more settled with it. So, it's, even though there's a lot of things that are out of our control, there's a lot that's within, and it can yield some pretty powerful outcomes in terms of your psychology.
Maybe we have talked about many things. Would you like to add something?
I don't think so. It was a nice set of questions. I can't think of anything. No, I think that was a good coverage of sort of where I've come from, what I'm working on now, and the topics I find of most interest, and the key takeaways from that. I thought it was a nice set. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay. If people want to contact you, connect with you, where can they find you online?
So if you go to GarethFurber.com, I'm pretty sure that'll take you to my personal blog, and I'm writing about mental fitness there. If you search for Gareth Furber, I could just do a Google search, and you'll find also my Flinders University details, and that either one of those is the best place. Or if you're on LinkedIn, look for me on there. That's where you found me. Thankfully there aren't too many Gareth Furbers in the world. Not many people share my name, so if you do a Google search for me, you're most likely to find something that I've been working on.
You could send the links, I can add them to the podcast so people can access them directly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few little projects there. I can project websites that I can let you know about as well, because there's a couple of other things we do that aren't quite, or that I do that aren't quite in this area, but people might find interesting as well.
Okay, that would be nice. I'd like to say thank you for the interview. Thank you for the time you've spent with me. It was such an interesting, value-based interview, and I really enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for reaching out and giving me the opportunity. It turned out to be my one thing for the month that was outside of my usual comfort zone. So I appreciate that.
Okay.
And good luck with the rest of the podcast as well, and interviewing other people.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too.
Bye.